Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. A particular note again today is almost certainly going to be the Infinite Integrations playlist, where I teach people how to do magic responsibly. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with additional facts and explanations concerning the globes and the monads. This is a page continued from the previous section. Two statements made in esoteric Buddhism must be noticed and the author's opinions quoted. On page 47, 5th edition, it is said, "The spiritual monads do not fully complete their mineral existence on globe A, then complete it on globe B, and so on. They pass several times round the whole circle as minerals, and then, again, several times round as vegetables, and several times as animals. We purposely refrain for the present from going into figures, etc., etc. See the theory of spiritual evolution. This was a wise course to adopt in view of the great secrecy maintained with regard to figures and numbers. This reticence is now partially relinquished, but it would perhaps have been better had the real numbers concerning rounds and evolutional gyrations been either entirely divulged at the time or as entirely withheld. Mr. Sennett understood this difficulty well when saying that, for reasons which are not easy for the outsider to divine, the possessors of occult knowledge are especially reluctant to give out facts relating to cosmogony, though it is hard for the uninitiated to understand why they should be withheld. I am going to tell you why they are withheld. It is because it is speculation, right? We've talked several times about that. Right? We can speculate about what happened before humans were on the planet, but no humans were on the planet, so we don't know. We don't have any records. We don't have any pictures. We don't have any evidence whatsoever that there was a species prior to us, that there was a civilization prior to 6,000 or so years ago in the way that we define it, even though I believe that there was. That, again, is speculation. And that's why, right, all of the numbers that we see as to counts in this is pure speculation. The trillions of years that they speculate, speculation, right? Those numbers cannot be clearly defined because they don't know them. I don't know them. I'm not claiming to have some special knowledge of that. What I am saying is, you don't know how many times a soul was an animal, or whether it even was. You can believe that it was. That kind of plays into my theory of spiritual evolution, but in mine, right, the way that I define things, I am here right now, I am Pitt, but the next time I come back, I'm not going to be in this flesh suit, right? I'm going to have different things that I think about. I'm going to have a different direction that I'm oriented in. I'm going to be learning different lessons. So does it even really count as a reincarnation at that point? Okay, kind of, sort of, maybe, okay, fine. My expression here is what it is here, today, now, and this is the one that I need to be concerned with. It is fun to speculate about, was I a pirate back in the 1700s? Was I a knight back in the 1400s? Was I a king back in the 1200s, right? These are fun speculations, but it is not something that we can ever know. And so, if they try to tell you, well, you're going to go around 7 times, that is a speculation. If they try to say that you were an animal 7 times, that was a speculation. They do not know that. I do not know that. No one knows that, and no one will know that until we are reunited with Source. And so, that's why they didn't put numbers in there. That's why they didn't say that, and that's fine, right? If you do not know, then if you're not clearly defining that you're speculating, you should just be quiet, right? Now, I speculate all the time, but I tell you I'm speculating. That is a key defining difference between me relaying knowledge and them relaying knowledge. They relay this knowledge as though it is true, right? Nobody knows how many yugas there are. Nobody knows how long each yuga is actually going to take. They can speculate. They can speculate based upon things that they believe are factual. but most of the things that they hold as factual can't even be proven as a fact, and that is a key problem with most of the numbers as defined, right? Whenever we come across a number, I'm going to tell you, yeah, that's speculation. Back to the text. That there were such reasons is evident. Nevertheless, it is to this reticence that most of the confused ideas of some Eastern as well as Western pupils are due. The difficulties in the way of acceptance of the two particular tenets under consideration seemed great, just because of the absence of any data to go upon. But there it was. For the figures belonging to the occult calculations cannot be given, as the masters have many times declared, outside of the circle of pledged Kalas, and not even these can break the rules. Yeah, that's what it is. To make things plainer, without touching upon the mathematical aspect of the doctrine, the teaching given may be expanded and some obscure points solved. As the evolution of the globes and that of the monads are so closely interblended, we will make of the two teachings one. In reference to the monads, the reader is asked to bear in mind that Eastern philosophy rejects the Western theological dogma of a newly created soul for every baby born, as being unphilosophical, as it is impossible in the economy of nature. We have talked before about how that is not necessarily true, and again, this is a speculation. Just like I said before, that is it really me reincarnating if everything that I am directed towards is different? It can be, absolutely. It's not for sure, right? It is unphilosophical to think that the God of all of creation could possibly create some new soul every single time. Are you saying that it is impossible for God to create souls? Or that there is an upper limit to the number of those that which he can create? Or anything along that nature? Are you saying that it is impossible for the creator of all of creation, he who is, was, and always shall be, the holder of all things alive, the very substance that makes up every single atom in existence and all of the space between those atoms, it is impossible for him to create a new incarnation each time? Now, I don't necessarily believe that he does, right? But to state that he can't, that's a lot farther than I'm going to go. I don't know if there may be one soul. We may all share the exact same soul at the same time, right? Me and you existing here together are different iterations of the same soul, the one electron theory. It is entirely possible that it is true, but again, it is speculation. We are all one because we are all related directly to the divine. We are here directly as inspiration from the divine. We are here at the will of the divine, and so we are all one. Why not one soul, right? These are fun things to speculate upon, but always remember that they are speculation. Even when somebody is telling you it is not possible, they are speculating. And again, I don't necessarily disagree with the fact that, or the assumption, that there are returns for souls, right? I believe that the lessons that I don't learn in this incarnation, I will learn in the next one. That is part of why I will choose to reincarnate, because this is a voluntary incarnation. Back to the text. There must be a limited number of monads evolving and growing more and more perfect through their assimilation of many successive personalities in every new manvantara. Again, speculation. This is absolutely necessary in views of the doctrines of rebirth, karma, and the gradual return of the human monad to its source, absolute deity. That is not absolutely necessary for that. Why? What makes that absolutely necessary? Because you believe that it is, right? I believe that karma is a thing, right? Maybe not the way that it is defined in various esoteric beliefs, but I do believe that you accumulate some type of a debt while you were here, and that you have a chance to alleviate some types of debt while you were here. I believe that those are more closely tied to this incarnation than they are to previous ones, even though you do carry over some of the stuff, right? If you didn't learn the lesson in the last incarnation, you get a chance to learn it in this one, but I believe that it is a fresher chance, if not a completely fresh chance. And so I disagree with this, that it is absolutely necessary in the view of the doctrines. Well, okay, maybe in the view of the doctrines of rebirth, karma, and gradual return, just as though assuming that somebody had to die in order to you to be forgiven from sin is absolutely essential to the doctrine that is Christianity, or that you have to sacrifice a goat in order for you to be forgiven from your sin is essential to the doctrine of Judaism, maybe it is absolutely necessary to the doctrines of rebirth and karma. But I don't believe in those, right? Not in the same way that is believed in by someone who thinks that it is or outside of the scope of the Creator to create. Thus, although the host of more or less progressed monads are almost incalculable, they are still finite, as is everything in this universe in differentiation and finiteness. Now see, this is contradicting yourself, right? You're saying that it is not possible for him to make new ones, but then he says, well, they are almost incalculable, and they are still finite, though. And yes, absolutely, anything that is created is within the realm of finite, right? If it has been created, it can be counted, even if you can't count it. There are a certain number of grains of sand on the beach at this precise second. That may change as the tides come in and the tides go out and rock gets worn away. But right now, right this second, you could, theoretically, count every grain of sand on the beach. It would be exceedingly difficult to do so, however, and so we act like it's incalculable, but it's not. It is. If we were able to pause time, we could count them all. Right? They are finite, just impossibly large to count. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean that he can't do it. And by he, again, that is just the popular vernacular. God, source, creator, is beyond your genders. All right, back to the text. As shown in the double diagram of human principles and the ascending globes of the world chains, there is an eternal concatenation of causes and effects and a perfect analogy which runs through and links together all the lines of evolution. One begets the other. Globes as personalities. But let us begin at the beginning. The general outline of the process by which the successive planetary chains are formed has just been given. To prevent future misconceptions, some further details may be offered which will also throw light on the history of humanity on our own chain, the progeny of that of the moon. In the diagrams on page 172, figure 1 represents the lunar chain of 7 planets at the outset of its 7th or last round, while figure 2 represents the Earth chain, which will be but is not yet in existence. The 7 globes of each chain are distinguished in their cyclic order by the letters A to G, the globes of the Earth chain being further marked by a cross, the symbol of the Earth. Now, it must be remembered that the monads cycling around any septenary chain are divided into 7 classes or hierarchies according to their respective stages of evolution, consciousness, and merit. Let us follow, then, the order of their appearance on planet A in the first round. The time spaces between the appearances of these hierarchies on any one globe are so adjusted that when Class 7, the last, appears on Globe A, Class 1, the first, has just passed on to Globe B, and so on, step by step all around the chain. And again, this is entirely speculation. Again, in the 7th round of the lunar chain, when Class 7, the last, quits Globe A, that globe, instead of falling asleep as it had done in previous rounds, begins to die, to go into its planetary pralaya. We're going to pop out the footnote. Occultism divides the periods of rest, pralaya, into several kinds. There is the individual pralaya of each globe. As humanity and life pass on to the next, 7 minor pralayas in each round, the planetary pralaya when 7 rounds are completed, the solar pralaya when the whole system is at an end, and finally the universal Maha, or Brahma, pralaya at the close of the age of Brahma. These are the 3 chief pralayas, or destruction periods. There are many other minor ones, but with these we are not concerned at present. This is the illustration that is being described with A and B and all of that. Again, this is speculation, and I do not necessarily believe any of it. Not that there is not a possibility that this happens, but that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the long run of things. Begins to die, and in its dying transfers successively, as just said, its principles, or life elements and energy, etc., one after the other into a new Laya Centre, which commences the formation of globe A of the Earth chain. A similar process takes place for each of the globes of the lunar chain, one after the other, each forming a fresh globe of the Earth chain. Our moon was the fourth globe of the series and was on the same plane of perception as our Earth. But globe A of the lunar chain is not fully dead until the first monads of the first class have passed from G or Z, the last of the lunar chain, into the nirvana which awaits them between the two chains. And similarly, for all of the other globes as stated, each giving birth to the corresponding globe of the Earth chain. Further, when globe A of the new chain is ready, the first class or hierarchy of the monads from the lunar chain incarnate upon it in the lowest kingdom, and so on successively. The result of this is that it is only the first class of monads which attains the human state of development during the first round, since the second class on each planet arriving later has not had time to reach that stage. Thus, the monads of class 2 reach the incipient human stage only in the second round, and so on, up until the middle of the fourth round. But at this point, and on the fourth round, in which the human stage will be fully developed, the door into the human kingdom closes, and henceforward the number of human monads, in example, monads in the human stage of development, is complete. For the monads which had not reached the human stage by this point will, owing to the evolution of humanity itself, find themselves so far behind that they will reach the human stage only at the close of the seventh and last round. They will, therefore, not be men on this chain, but will form the humanity of a future Manvantara, and be rewarded by becoming men on a higher chain altogether, thus receiving their karmic compensation. To this, there is but one solitary exception, for very good reasons, of which we will speak later on, but this accounts for the difference in the races. And again, I do not necessarily agree with everything being stated, but it is a good speculation, right? I believe that we are on, if this were true, we, humanity, would have to be on the fifth round at a minimum. Not the fourth, but the fifth. We're able to speak, right? We can deal with things that others can't. We have the ability to plan. We have length, width, breadth, thought, and time. That is our 5 dimensions that we do exist in. And I don't know why people cannot wrap their heads around this, right? Like Sheik and Baghdad. Right? But I believe that. But that is speculation for me. That is part of the theory of spiritual evolution, that we go from the singular point through the various stages of existence into the fifth, which we are, and then possibly on the other side we go into the sixth. I don't know exactly what the details of the sixth are. It appears to be the disincorporated spirits and the level of the elementals, not the deities like the angels and the demons, which are not true deities, but considered so by most people. I don't believe that they're deities, right? The only deity is the one, which is the 8th stage, and none of us are there, right? We get reunited to it outside of this existence. And so I hold different beliefs than this. If we were, however, in these monads, we would have to be in the 5th one, not the 4th one, for a variety of reasons. All right, back to the text. It thus becomes apparent how perfect is the analogy between the processes of nature in the cosmos and in the individual man. The latter lives through his life cycle and dies, his higher principles corresponding in the development of a planetary chain to the cycling monads, pass into Devakan, which corresponds to the nirvana and states of rest intervening between the two chains. The man's lower principles are disintegrated in time and are used by nature again for the formation of new human principles, and at the same time, and the same process takes place in the disintegration and formation of worlds. Analogy is thus the surest guide to the comprehension of the occult teachings. This is one of the 7 mysteries of the moon, and it is now revealed. The 7 mysteries are called by the Japanese Yamabusis, and the mystics of the Lao Tse sect and the ascetic monks of Kyoto, the Zennodo, the 7 jewels. Only the Japanese and the Chinese Buddhist ascetics and initiates are, if possible, even more reticent in giving out their knowledge than are the Hindus. But the reader must not be allowed to lose sight of the monads, and must be enlightened as to their nature, as far as permitted, without trespassing upon the highest mysteries, of which the writer does not in any way pretend to know the last or final word. The monadic host may be roughly divided into 3 great classes. The most developed monads, the lunar gods or spirits, called in India the Pitris, whose function it is to pass in the first round through the whole triple cycle of the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms in their most ethereal, filmy, and rudimentary forms, in order to clothe themselves in and assimilate the nature of the newly formed chain. They are those who first reach the human form, if there can be any form in the realm of the almost subjective, on Globe A in the first round. It is they, therefore, who lead and represent the human element during the second and third rounds, and finally evolve their shadows at the beginning of the fourth round for the second class, or those who come behind them. 2. These monads that are the first to reach the human stage during the 3.5 rounds and to become men. Footnote. We are forced to use here the misleading word men, and this is a clear proof of how little any European language is adopted to express the subtle distinctions. It stands to reason that these men did not resemble the men of today, either in form or nature. Why, then, it may be asked, call them men at all? Because there is no other term in any Western language which approximately conveys the idea intended. The word men at least indicates that these beings were manus, thinking entities, however they differed in form and intellection from ourselves. But in reality they were, in respect of spirituality and intellection, rather gods than men. This is some deep speculation. The same difficulty of language is met with in describing these stages through which the monad passes. Metaphysically speaking, it is, of course, an absurdity to talk of the development of a monad, or to say that it becomes man. But any attempt to preserve metaphysical accuracy of language in the use of such a tongue as the English would necessitate at least 3 extra volumes of this work, and would entail an amount of verbal repetition which would become wearisome in the extreme. It stands to reason that a monad cannot either progress or develop, or even be affected by the changes of state it passes through. It is not of this world or plane, and may be compared only to an indestructible star of divine light and fire thrown down onto our earth as a plank of salvation for the personalities in which it indwells. It is for the latter to cling to it, and thus, partaking of its divine nature, obtain immortality. Left to itself, the monad will cling to no one, but like the plank, be drifted away to another incarnation by the unresting current of evolution. 3. The laggards. The monads, which are retarded, that is not a bad word, it is a technical term, and which will not reach, by reason of karmic impediments, the human stage at all during this cycle or round, save one exception, which will be spoken of elsewhere, as already promised. Now the evolution of the external form or body round the astral is produced by the terrestrial forces, just as in the case of the lower kingdoms, but the evolution of the eternal, internal, or real man is purely spiritual. It is now no more a passage of impersonal monad through many and various forms of matter, endowed at best with instinct and consciousness on quite a different plane, as in the case of external evolution, but a journey of the pilgrim soul through various states of not only matter, but self-consciousness and self-perception, or a perception from appreciation. See gods, monads, and atoms. The monad emerges from its state of spiritual and intellectual unconsciousness, and, skipping the first two planes, too near the absolute to permit of any correlation with anything on the lower plane, it gets direct into the plane of mentality. But there is no plane in the whole universe with a wider margin, or a wider field of action, in its almost endless gradations of perceptive and apperceptive qualities, than this plane, which has in its turn an appropriate smaller plane for every form, from the mineral monad up to the time when that monad blossoms forth by evolution into the divine monad. But all the time it is still one and the same monad, differing only in its incarnations throughout its ever-succeeding cycles of partial or total obscuration of spirit, or the partial or total obscuration of matter, two polar antitheses, and it ascends into the realms of mental spirituality, or descends into the depths of materiality. To return to esoteric Buddhism, it is there stated with regard to the enormous period intervening between the mineral epoch on globe A and the man epoch, which is a footnote. The term man epoch is here used because of the necessity of giving a name to that fourth kingdom which follows the animal. But in truth, the man on globe A during the first round is no man, but only his prototype or dimensionless image from the astral regions. The man epoch, that the full development of the mineral epoch on globe A, prepares the way for the vegetable development, and as soon as this begins, the mineral life impulse overflows into globe B. Then, when the vegetable development on globe A is complete and the animal development begins, the vegetable life impulse overflows to globe B, and the mineral impulse passes on to globe C. Then, finally, comes the human life impulse on globe A. I have to say, even though it is just conceit, I guess, I think that my theory fits a whole lot better than theirs does. And so it goes on for 3 rounds, when it slackens and finally stops at the threshold of our globe at the 4th round. Because of the human period of the true physical men to be, the 7th is now reached. This is evident, for, as said, there are processes of evolution which precede the mineral kingdom, and thus a wave of evolution, indeed, several waves of evolution, precede the mineral wave in its progress round the spheres. And now we have to quote from another article, The Mineral Monad in 5 Years of Theosophy. There are 7 kingdoms. The first group comprises 3 degrees of elementals, or nascent centers of forces. From the first stage of differentiation from Mula Prakriti, or rather Pradhana, primordial homogeneous matter, to its 3rd degree, an example from full unconsciousness to semi-perception, the second or higher group embraces the kingdoms from vegetable to man. The mineral kingdom thus forming the central or turning point in the degrees of the monadic essence, considered as an evoluting energy. 3 stages, sub-physical, on the elemental side. The mineral kingdom, 3 stages on the objective physical side. These are the first or preliminary 7 links of the evolutionary chain. There is a footnote on physical, so let's pop that out and see. Physical here means differentiated for cosmical purposes and work. That physical side, nevertheless, if objective to the apperception of being from other planes, is yet quite subjective to us on our plane. Preliminary, because they are preparatory, and though belonging in fact to the natural, they would yet be more correctly described as subnatural evolution. This process makes a halt in its stages at the 3rd. At the threshold of the 4th stage, when it becomes, on the plane of the natural evolution, the first really manward stage, thus forming with the 3 elemental kingdoms, the 10. the Sephirothal number. It is at this point that begins a descent of spirit into matter equivalent to an ascent in physical evolution, a reascent from the deepest steps of materiality, the mineral, towards its status quo ante, with a corresponding dissipation of concrete organism, up to nirvana, the vanishing point of differentiated matter. Therefore, it becomes evident why that which is pertinently called in esoteric Buddhism wave of evolution, and mineral, vegetable, animal, and man impulse stops at the door of our globe at its fourth cycle or round. It is at this point that the cosmic monad, Buddhi, will be wedded to and become the vehicle of the atmic ray. An example, it, Buddhi, will awaken to an apperception of it, Atman, and thus enter on the first step of a new septenary ladder of evolution, which will lead it, eventually, to the 10th, counting from the lowest upwards, of the Sephirothal tree, the crown. Also, side note, the Sephirothal tree, if you have not been watching any of my videos, I do not lend much credence to at all. So, there's that. Like, there are 7 internal chakras. There is 1 external chakra. You have access to all of them if you do things correctly. And there's no need for the 10. There's just not. They seem to be a little bit out of line and order with what would be actually required for things. The 6, which is actually 8, the Star of David, right? We've talked about that before, is a better representation than 10. It really is. Yeah. Now, what is a monad, and what relation does it bear to an atom? The following reply is based on the explanations given in answer to these questions in the above-cited article, The Mineral Monad, written by the author. None whatever is answer to the second question. So no relation to the atom at all. We're going to get back to this. To the atom or molecule as existing in the scientific conception at present. It can neither be compared with a microscopic organism, once classed among polygastric infusoria, and now regarded as a vegetable, and classed among algae. Nor is it quite the monas of the peripatetics. Physically or constitutionally, the mineral monad differs, of course, from the human monad, which is neither physical, nor can its constitution be rendered by chemical symbols and elements. In short, as the spiritual monad is one, universal, boundless, and imperitite, whose rays, nevertheless, form what we, in our ignorance, call the individual monads of men, so the mineral monad, being at the opposite point of the circle, is also one, and from it proceed the countless physical atoms which science is beginning to regard as individualized. All right, we're going to hit the theory of spiritual evolution. I haven't done it in this video, and I wasn't going to do it in this because we have hit it so many times before, but this might be the only video you see, and so here it is. In the beginning there was the source, which is God, all things being one, right? At the beginning of the individuation began the first layer of existence, the first realm of existence, the first dimension in which existence is possible, and that is the point, the singular point of existence. That is the atomic existence. That would be the first dimension. What the atomic existence is every single individual atom outside of cooperation and conjunction, right? The free-flowing oxygen and hydrogen in the air around me, the carbon that is also just floating around, right? It is not incorporated into anything organic. It can be part of the rocks, it can be part of the water, right? But it is not an organic existence in the manner that it has zero growth and zero understanding of anything, right? The second plane of existence is going to be plants. That is the incorporation of the first one into a group, and that group has growth, right? It can grow up. Most plants grow up. Some of them grow a little bit wider, but they don't have the capability of saying, hey, there's not enough water right here. I'm going to go over there. So they live in the 2D plane of existence, right? Just like a sheet of paper. There's length and there's width, but there's no real height. Or there's length and there's height, but there's no real width. However you want to look at it. The third plane of existence is incorporating the first two. This is the simple animals. These are the animals that exist merely upon instinct and cannot be trained to do things. They don't have anticipation of anything, really. They act upon levels of instinct, right? A squirrel will put up nuts for the winter, right? They make their little caches wherever they happen to be. But it's not really a thinking process. It is merely instinct upon it. They have the capability to move where they want to be, which puts them in the third plane of existence. But they don't really think about, change is coming. I need to do things. They don't really anticipate in the same way that we do. The fourth plane of existence is the more complicated of the animals. These are the ones that can be trained. Dogs. Several other animals along those lines, but dogs are a really good example because they have the ability to anticipate, but they don't really have the concept of time in the same way that we do. They have a small amount of thought, right? They know it is 5 o'clock, roughly. My human is going to be getting home soon, right? They have that ability to anticipate. They know that the night is almost over and my human is about to feed me. They can anticipate that. That is a small concept of thought, not really a mastery of it, but the capacity to be trained to do something. I need you to go do this thing. And they remember that thing, right? It is not an instinctual thing. It is an ingrained, trained response. That is the fourth level of existence. The fifth level of existence is us. We have length, we have width, we have height, right? We can go where we want to, do what we want to. We have thought, and we have the mastery of time. Well, not mastery, the understanding and the concept of time. That allows us to say, you know what? We can build a storehouse and put up food for 3 years from now because there might be a famine. That allows us to pre-plan, right? That is length, width, height, thought, and time. That is our fifth dimension. We are in 5D space in our temple. Individualized souls in the Holy Spirit with our temple navigating 5D space. The next level of existence, the sixth plane of existence, is going to be the disincorporated spirits and the elementals. These are things that have the capacity for time, if not the understanding thereof. If you read the accounts in Isis Unveiled, right? We had several accounts of these elemental spirits being able to communicate about things forward and backwards in time, but not really understanding the implications and the concepts thereof. They have the time, they just don't have the mastery of thought in the same way that we do. There's a small level of thought, but they exist on the next level of existence. The seventh level, to me, is going to be the realm of angels and demons. These are just below the deity, but they are not deities themselves. They are capable of many things that we cannot. They have length, width, height, thought, and time, and mastery levels. They understand forward, they understand backwards, and the implications thereof. They are the guiders, the ability to come down and say, hey, you're on the wrong path, you need to change and go this way. Right? The elementals don't do that. They come and they say, hey, this thing is happening. They don't give you any advice. They don't give you any direction. They just say, this is the thing. The seventh level, they come and they say, hey, this is the thing, and here's what you should do about it. Right? We're going to go and smite Sodom and Gomorrah, for instance. And then the eighth level is the same as the initial level, which is 0, right? 0 and 8 both represent the exact same thing, the divine. That is the level that we return to and the source from which we come, 0 and 8. And so that is the 8 levels of spiritual evolution, in my estimation. Now, to me, that works a lot better than this. I wanted to point it out before we get through the rest of this because it keeps coming up. Right? I was going to ignore it. I was going to, because I've said this so many times, but this might be your first video, and hopefully that brought a little bit of enlightenment about what I say when I say that we're in the 5th dimension. Right? We're not on the 3rd dimension. We have time and thought. That it puts us in 2 more dimensions past length, width, and height. If you are only thinking of length, width, and height, you are restricting yourself. Back to the text. Otherwise, how could one account for and explain mathematically the evolutionary and spiral progress of the four kingdoms? The monad is the combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and the seventh, properly speaking. The term human monad applies only to the dual soul, Atma Buddhi, not to the highest spiritual vivifying principle, Atma, alone. But since the spiritual soul, if divorced from the latter, Atma, could have no existence, no being, it has thus been called now the monadic, or rather cosmic, essence, if such a term be permitted, in the mineral, vegetable, and animal, though the same throughout the series of cycles from the lowest elemental up to the Deva kingdom, yet differs in the scale of progression. It would be very misleading to imagine a monad as a separate entity trailing its slow way in a distinct path through the lower kingdoms, and, after an incalculable series of transformations, flowering into a human being. In short, that the monad of a Humboldt dates back to the monad of an atom of hornblende. Instead of saying a mineral monad, the more correct phraseology in physical science, which differentiates every atom, would of course have been to call it the monad manifesting in that form of prakriti called the mineral kingdom. The atom, as represented in the ordinary scientific hypotheses, is not a particle of something, animated by a psychic something, destined after eons to blossom as a man. But it is a concrete manifestation of the universal energy, which itself has not yet become individualized. A sequential manifestation of the one universal monas. The ocean of matter does not divide into its potential and constituent drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. The tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animals comes almost to the point. The peripatetics apply the word monos to the whole cosmos in the pantheistic sense, and the occultists, while accepting this thought for convenience sake, distinguish the progressive stages of evolution of the concrete from the abstract by terms of which the mineral, vegetable, animal, etc., monad are examples. The term merely means that the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through that arc of its circuit. The monadic essence begins to imperceptibly differentiate towards individual consciousness in the vegetable kingdom. As the monads are uncompounded things, as correctly defined by Leibniz, it is the spiritual essence which vivifies them in their degrees of differentiation, which properly constitutes the monad, not the atomic aggregation, which is only the vehicle, and the substance through which thrill the lower and the higher degrees of intelligence. Leibniz conceived of the monads as elementary and indestructible units endowed with the power of giving and receiving with respect to other units, and thus of determining all spiritual and physical phenomena. It is he who invented the term apperception, which, together with nerve, not perception, but rather sensation, expresses the state of the monadic consciousness through all the kingdoms up to man. Thus, it may be wrong on strictly metaphysical lines to call Atma Buddhi a monad, since in the materialistic view it is dual and therefore compound. But, as matter is spirit and vice versa, and since the universe and the deity which informs it are unthinkable apart from each other, so in the case of Atma Buddhi, the latter being the vehicle of the former. Buddhi stands in the same relation to Atma as Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic Logos, does to An Sof, or Mulu Prakriti, to Parabrahm. A few words more of the moon. What, it may be asked, are the lunar monads just spoken of? The description of the 7 classes of pitras will come later, but now some general explanations may be given. It must be plain to everyone that they are monads, who, having ended their life cycle on the lunar chain, which is inferior to the terrestrial chain, have incarnated on this one. But there are some further details which may be added, though they border too closely on forbidden ground to be treated of fully. The last word of the mystery is divulged only to the adepts, but it may be stated that our satellite is only the gross body of its invisible principles. Seeing then that there are 7 earths, so there are 7 moons, the last one alone being visible. The same for the sun, whose visible body is called a maya, a reflection, just as man's body is. The real sun and the real moon are as invisible as the real man, says the occult maxim. And it may be remarked en passant that those ancients were not so foolish after all, who first started the idea of the 7 moons. For though this conception is now taken solely on an astronomical measure of time, in a very materialized form, yet underlying the husk there can still be recognized the traces of a profoundly philosophical idea. In reality, the moon is only the satellite of the earth in one respect, vis-a-vis that physically the moon revolves around the earth, but in every other respect it is the earth which is the satellite of the moon and not vice versa. That's wild. Startling as the statement may seem, it is not without confirmation from scientific knowledge. Really. It is evidenced by the tides, by the cyclic changes in many forms of disease which coincide with the lunar phases. It can be traced in the growth of plants. It is very marked in the phenomena of human gestation and conception. The importance of the moon and its influence on the earth were recognized in every ancient religion, notably the Jewish, and have been remarked by many observers of cyclical and cyclical phenomena. But, so far as science knows, the Earth's action on the moon is confined to the physical attraction which causes her to cycle in her orbit. And should an objector insist that this fact alone is sufficient evidence that the moon is truly the Earth's satellite on other planes of action, one may reply by asking whether a mother, who walks round and round her child's cradle, keeping watch over the infant, is subordinate of her child or dependent upon it. Though in one sense she is its satellite, yet she is certainly older and more fully developed than the child she watches. This is wild, right? This is saying that just because we are affected by the things that happen because the moon is in our orbit, that the moon is responsible for us. And that's a little bit of, that's a lot wild, right? That is exactly the same as saying that because I have effects that come from drinking this tea, obviously the tea is the originator of me, right? Now this tea holds several different things. I know it looks a little bit funky if you don't know what's in it, but there's turmeric, there's ginger, there's cayenne, I've got thyme and rosemary, I've got eucalyptus, I've got lemon. And each one of these things does a little bit something different to my body. It affects my body in very real ways. But I made this tea. I put it together. And just because it affects me does not mean that it is in control of me. Right? That is the logic that is being applied here. Right? Just because the moon affects the tides due to gravitational pull, which is electromagnetic manipulation, by the way. Just because that happens does not mean that the moon is the ruler. Right? That's a little bit too esoteric for me, right? I believe in magic, but I don't believe in that magic. It is then the moon that plays the largest and most important part as well in the formation of the earth itself. It is most likely that the moon is the result of a catastrophe on the earth. That is not something I can prove. We talked about it briefly in the last video, but there are reasons to believe that a chunk of the planet was knocked off at a point in history, may even have been recorded, and that we captured that chunk that flew off, and that is the moon. There are many reasons to believe that, and we don't even have the time to get into those here, but if that is something that you are interested in, let me know down below, and we will see if we can work out a way to show that in a better way, right? But it is entirely possible. This assumption, yeah, no. I mean, this is, I have a doctrine, let me make history fit that doctrine. I don't have time for that. All right. It is then the moon that plays the largest and most important part, as well in the formation of the earth itself, as in the peopling thereof with human beings. The lunar monads, or pitras, the ancestors of man, become, in reality, man himself. They are the monads, who enter on the cycle of evolution on globe A, and who, passing round the chain of planets, evolve the human form as has just been shown. At the beginning of the human stage of the fourth round on this globe, they ooze out their astral doubles from the ape-like forms which they had evolved in round 3. It is this subtle, finer form which serves as the model round which nature builds physical man. These monads, or divine sparks, are thus the lunar ancestors, the pitras themselves. For these lunar spirits have to become men in order that their monads may reach a higher plane of activity and self-consciousness. In example, the plane of the Manassas Putras, those who endow the senseless shells, created and informed by the pitras, with mind in the latter part of the third root race. In the same way, the monads, or egos, of the men of the seventh round of our earth, after our own globes, A, B, C, D, etc., sequentia, maybe, parting with their life energy, will have informed and thereby called to life other Laya centers, destined to live and act on in a still higher plane of being. In the same way will the terrene ancestors create those who will become their superiors. It now becomes plain that there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme for the formation of the three periodical upadis, or rather, three separate schemes of evolution, which in our system are inextricably interwoven and interblended at every point. These are the monadic, or spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical evolutions. These three are the finite aspects, or the reflections, on the field of cosmic illusion of Atma, the seventh, the one reality. 1. The monadic is, as the name implies, concerned with the growth and development into still higher phases of activity of the monad in conjunction with 2. The intellectual, represented by the Manasa Dayanis, the solar devas, or the Agnishwata Pitras, the givers of intelligence and consciousness to man, and, we have a footnote for consciousness, vide conclusion in part 2 of this book. 3. The physical, represented by the Kakhayas of the lunar pitras, round which nature has concreted the present physical body. This body serves as the vehicle for the growth, to use a misleading word, and the transformations through manas, and, owing to the accumulation of experiences, to the finite, of the finite into the infinite, of the transient into the eternal and absolute. Each of these three systems has its own laws and is ruled and guided by different sets of the highest daihanis, or logoi. Each is represented in the constitution of man, the microcosm of the great macrocosm, and it is the union of these three streams in him which makes him the complex being he now is. Nature, the physical evolutionary power, could never evolve intelligence unaided. She can only create senseless forms, as will be seen in our anthropogenesis. I am looking forward to that. The lunar monads cannot progress, for they have not yet had sufficient touch with the forms created by nature to allow their accumulating experiences through its means. It is the Manasa Dhyanis who fill up the gap, and they represent the evolutional power of intelligence and mind, the link between spirit and matter in this round. Also, it must be borne in mind that the monads which enter upon the evolutionary cycle upon Globe A in the first round are in very different stages of development. Here, hence, the matter becomes somewhat complicated. Let us recapitulate. The most developed monads, the lunar, reach the human germ stage in the first round, become terrestrial, though very ethereal beings, towards the end of the third round, remaining on it, the globe, through the obscuration period, as the seeds for future mankind in the fourth round, and thus become the pioneers of humanity at the beginning of this, the fourth round. Others reach the human stage only during the later rounds, an example, in the second, third, or first half of the fourth round. And finally, the most retarded of all, an example, those still occupying animal forms after the middle turning point of the fourth round, will not become men at all during this Manvantara. They will reach the verge of humanity only at the close of the seventh round to be, in their turn, ushered into a new chain after Pralaya by older pioneers, the progenitors of humanity, or the seed humanity, Shishta, vis-a-vis the men who will be at the head of all at the end of these rounds. The student hardly needs any further explanation on the part played by the fourth globe and the fourth round in the scheme of evolution. From the preceding diagrams, which are applicable, mutatis mutandis, to rounds, globes, or races, it will be seen that the fourth member of a series occupies a unique position. Unlike the others, the fourth has no sister globe on the same plane as itself, and it thus forms the fulcrum of the balance, represented by the whole chain. It is the sphere of final evolutionary adjustments, the world of karmic scales, the hall of justice, where the balance is struck which determines the future course of the monad during the remainder of its incarnations in the cycle. And therefore it is that, after this central turning point has been passed in the great cycle, an example, after the middle point of the fourth race in the fourth round on our globe, no more monads can enter the human kingdom. The door is closed for this cycle and the balance struck. For were it otherwise, had there been a new soul created for each of the countless milliards of human beings that have passed away, and had there been no reincarnation, it would become difficult indeed to provide room for the disembodied spirits, nor could the origin and cause of suffering ever be accounted for. It is the ignorance of occult tenets and the enforcement of false conceptions under the guise of religious education which have created materialism and atheism as a protest against the asserted divine order of things. Ooh-wee, that's pushing some boundaries there. The only exception to the rule just stated are the dumb races, whose monads are already within the human stage, in virtue of the fact that these animals are later than and even have descended from man, their last descendants being the anthropoid and other apes. These human presentiments are in truth the distorted copies of the early humanity, but this will receive full attention in the next book. I will be very interested to see that. I will be very interested to see how you pull this out of your ass. As the commentary, broadly rendered, says, 1. Every form on earth and every speck, atom, in space strives in its efforts towards self-formation to follow the model placed for it in the heavenly man. Its, the atoms, involution and evolution, its external and internal growth and development have all one and the same object, man. Man as the highest physical and ultimate form on this earth, the monad, in its absolute totality and awakened condition, as the culmination of the divine incarnations on earth. This is incredibly prideful, right? You are assuming, one, that we are the epitome of life on earth. That doesn't necessarily have to be the case. The case, not case. Dolphins are extremely intelligent. You can make the argument that they are better organized and with less malice than us, even though they do have malice moments. There are other animals with extreme intelligence. Octopi, for instance. There are several other animals which it could be. Right? They could very well be beyond us, and we don't have the understanding for it. Now, I don't necessarily believe that is true. But in my theory, I believe that there is another realm beyond us and another one beyond that. And it is entirely possible that those beings, which have been called angels and demons and aliens and all of those things, are indeed a better representation of evolution than we are. That is not to say that they are, but it is entirely possible that they are. It is extremely prideful to assume that because we have mastery of 5D space, that we are the epitome of creation. Right? That is heady. Right? There is no reason to say that a dandelion does not have a more intricate and explicit purpose than you do. Again, not necessarily something that I believe, but something that we should at least consider. 2. The Daihanis, Vitras, are those who have evolved their Bhuta, doubles, from themselves, which Rupa, form, has become the vehicle of Monads, 7th and 6th principles, that had completed their cycle of transmigration in the 3 preceding kalpas, rounds. Then they, the astral doubles, become the men of the first human phase of the round, but they were not complete and was senseless. Rosemary. This will be explained in the books that follow. Meanwhile, man, or rather his monad, has existed on the earth from the very beginning of this round. But, up to our own 5th race, the external shapes which cover these divine astral doubles changed and consolidated with every subrace, the form and physical structure of the fauna changing at the same time, as they had to be adapted to the ever-changing conditions of life on this globe during the geological periods of its formative cycle. And thus, they go on changing with every root race and every chief subrace, down to the last one of the 7th in this round. 3. The inner, now concealed man was then, in the beginnings, the external man, the progeny of the Dhyanis, Pitres. He was the son like unto his father, like the lotus whose external shape assumes gradually the form of the model within itself. So did the form of man in the beginning evolve from within without. After the cycle in which man began to procreate his species after the fashion of the present animal kingdom, it became the reverse. The human fetus follows now, in its transformations, all the forms that the physical frame of man had assumed throughout the 3 kalpas, rounds. During the tentative efforts at plastic formation around the monad by senseless, because imperfect matter in her blind wanderings. In the present age, the physical embryo is a plant, a reptile, an animal, before it finally becomes man, evolving within himself his own ethereal counterpart in his turn. In the beginning, it was that counterpart, astral man, which, being senseless, got entangled in the meshes of matter. But this man belongs to the 4th round. As shown, the monad had passed through, journeyed, and been imprisoned in every transitional form throughout every kingdom of nature during the 3 preceding rounds. But the monad, which becomes human, is not the man. In this round, with the exception of the highest mammals after man, the anthropoids, destined to die out in this our race, when their monads will be liberated and pass into the astral human forms, or the highest elementals, of the 6th and 7th races. Footnote on 6th. Nature never represents herself. Therefore, the anthropoids of our day have not existed at any time since the middle of the Miocene period, when, like all crossbreeds, they began to show a tendency, more and more marked as time went on, to return to the type of their first planet parent, the black and yellow gigantic Lemuro antillean. Atlantean. To search for the missing link is useless. To the scientist of the closing sixth root race, millions and millions of years hence, our modern races, or rather their fossils, will appear as those of small, insignificant apes, an extinct species of the genus Homo. Of the sixth and seventh races, and then into the lowest forms of the fifth round, human forms of the fifth round. No units of either of the kingdoms are animated any longer by monads destined to become human in their next stage, but only by the lower elementals of their respective realms. Footnote. These elementals will become human monads in their turn only at the next great planetary Magna Terra. The last human monad incarnated before the beginning of the fifth root race, see footnote. Such anthropoids form an exception because they were not intended by nature, but are the direct production and creation of senseless man. The Hindus gave a divine origin to the apes and monkeys because the men of the third race were gods from another plane who had become senseless mortals. This subject had already been touched upon in Isis Unveiled 12 years ago, as plainly as was then possible. On pages 278 and 279, the reader is referred to the Brahmins, if he would know the reason of the regard they have for the monkeys. For then he, the reader, would perhaps learn, were the Brahmin to judge him worthy of an explanation, that the Hindu sees in the ape but what Manu desired he should, the transformation of species most directly connected with that of the human family, a bastard branch engrafted on their own stock before the final perfection of the latter. He might learn, further, that in the eyes of the educated heathen, the spiritual or inner man is one thing, and on his terrestrial physical casket another. That physical nature, the great combination of physical correlations of forces, ever creeping onward towards perfection, has to avail itself of the material at hand. She models and remodels as she proceeds, and finishing her crowning work in man, presents him alone as a fit tabernacle for the overshadowing of the divine spirit. Moreover, a German scientific work is mentioned in a footnote on the same page. It says that a Hanoverian scientist had recently published a book entitled Über die Auflösung der Arten durch Naturliche Zuchtwahl, in which he shows with great ingenuity that Darwin was wholly mistaken in tracing man back to the ape. On the contrary, he maintains that it is the ape which evolved from man. He shows that in the beginning mankind were morally and physically the types and prototypes of our present race and of our human dignity, by their beauty of form, regularity of feature, cranial development, nobility of sentiments, heroic impulses, and grandeur of ideal conception. This is a purely Brahmanic, Buddhistic, and Kabbalistic philosophy. The book is copiously illustrated with diagrams, tables, etc. It asserts that the gradual debasement and degradation of man, morally and physically, can be readily traced throughout the ethnological transformation down to our time, and, as one portion has already degenerated into apes, so the civilized man of the present day will, at last, under the action of the inevitable law of necessity, be also succeeded by like descendants. If we may judge of the future by the actual present, it certainly does seem possible that so unspiritual and materialistic a body should end as simia rather than as seraphs. But, though the apes descend from man, it is certainly not the fact that the human monad, which has once reached the level of humanity, ever incarnates again in the form of an animal. I do not believe at all that humans or that apes developed from humans, any more than I believe that humans developed from apes. Right? To me, both of those are equally incomplete. There is no biological imperative. Be very clear about this. There is no biological imperative for losing your hair, right? I have a lot of hair on my face. I've got a good bit on my head. I have a little bit on my arms. I'm lightly wooded across my chest. But I'm not insulated in the way that a gorilla is, right? The hair that the evolutionists suppose that we lost over time served a biological function. There is no biological imperative to lose hair and then develop clothes to replace the hair. Doesn't make any sense. So I do believe that we are created fully and completely in the way that we are, but I also believe that the simians were created too. All right. The cycle of metempsychosis for the human monad is closed, for we are in the fourth round and the fifth root race. The reader will have to bear in mind, at any rate, one who has made himself acquainted with esoteric Buddhism, that the stanzas which follow in this book and Book 2 speak of the evolution in our fourth round only. The latter is the cycle of the turning point, after which matter, having reached its lowest depths, begin to strive onward and to get spiritualized with every new race and with every fresh cycle. Therefore, the student must take care not to seek contradiction where there is none. As in esoteric Buddhism, rounds are spoken of in general, while here only the fourth, or our present round, is meant. Then it was the work of formation. Now it is that of reformation and evolutionary perfection. Finally, to close this chapter anent various but unavoidable misconceptions, we must refer to a statement in esoteric Buddhism, which has produced a very fatal impression upon the mind of many theosophists. One unfortunate sentence from the work just referred to is constantly being brought forward to prove the materialism of the doctrine. On page 48, 5th edition, the author, referring to the progress of organisms on the globes, says that the mineral kingdom will no more develop the vegetable than the earth was able to develop man from the ape till it received an impulse. Whether this sentence renders literally the thought of the author or is simply, as we believe it is, a lapsus calami, may remain an open question. It is really with surprise that we have ascertained the fact that esoteric Buddhism was so little understood by some theosophists as to have led them into the belief that it thoroughly supported Darwinian evolution, and especially the theory of the descent of man from a pithecoid ancestor. As one member writes, I suppose you realize that 3/4 of theosophists and even outsiders imagine that, as far as the evolution of man is concerned, Darwinism and theosophy kiss one another. Nothing of the kind was ever realized, nor is there ever any great warrant for it. So far as we know, in esoteric Buddhism, it has been repeatedly stated that evolution, as taught by Manu and Kapila, was the groundwork of the modern teachings. But neither occultism nor theosophy has ever supported the wild theories of the present Darwinists, least of all the descent of man from an ape. Of this, more hereafter, but one has only to turn to page 47 of Esoteric Buddhism, 5th edition, to find there the statement that man belongs to a kingdom distinctly separate from that of the animals. With such a plain and unequivocal statement before him, it is very strange that any careful student should have been so misled unless he is prepared to charge the author with a gross contradiction. Every round repeats on a higher scale the evolutionary work of the preceding round, with the exception of some higher anthropoids, as just mentioned. The monadic inflow, or inner evolution, is at an end until the next Manvantara. It can never be too often repeated that the full-blown human monads have to be first disposed of before a new crop of candidates appear on this globe at the beginning of the next cycle. Thus, there is a law, and this is why, during the fourth round, man appears on earth earlier than any animal creation, as will be described. But it is still urged that the author of Esoteric Buddhism has preached Darwinism all along. Certain passages would undoubtedly seem to lend countenance to this inference. Besides which, the occultists themselves are ready to concede partial correctness to the Darwinian hypothesis. in later details, bylaws of evolution, and after the midway point of the fourth race. Of that which has taken place, physical science can really know nothing, for such matters lie entirely outside of its sphere of investigation. But what the occultists have never admitted, nor will they ever admit, is that man was an ape in this or any other round, or that he ever could be one, however much he may have been ape-like. This is vouched for by the very authority from whom the author of Esoteric Buddhism got his information. Thus, to those who confront the occultists with these lines from the above-named volume, it is enough to show that we may, as reasonably, and that we must, if we would, talk about these matters at all, conceive a life impulse giving birth to mineral form, as of the same sort of impulse concerned to raise a race of apes into a race of rudimentary men. To those who bring this passage forward as showing decided Darwinism, the occultists answer by pointing to the explanation of the master, Mr. Sennett's teacher, which would contradict these lines, were they written in the spirit attributed to them. A copy of this letter was sent to the writer, together with others, 2 years ago, 1886, with additional marginal remarks to quote from in the Secret Doctrine. It begins by considering the difficulty experienced by the Western student in reconciling some facts, previously given, with the evolution of man from the animal, an example from the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, and advises the student to hold to the doctrine of analogy and correspondences. Then it touches upon the mystery of the devas, and even the gods, having to pass through states which it was agreed to refer to as metallization, inherbiation, inzuination, and finally incarnation, and explains this by hinting at the necessity of failures, even in the ethereal races of Diane Kohans. Concerning this it says, "Still, as these failures are too far progressed and spiritualized to be thrown back forcibly from Diane Kohanship into the vortex of a new primordial evolution through the lower kingdoms, after which only a hint is given about the mystery contained in the allegory of the fallen Asuras, which will be expanded and explained in Book 2. When karma has reached them at the stage of human evolution, they will have to drink it to the last drop in the bitter cup of retribution. Then they will become an active force and commingle with the elementals, the progressed entities of the pure animal kingdom, to develop little by little the full type of humanity. These Diane Kohans, as we see, do not pass through the three kingdoms as do the lower Pitras, nor do they incarnate in man until the third root race. Thus, as the teaching stands, man, in the first round and first race on Globe D, our Earth, was an ethereal being, a lunar Dhyani, as man, not intelligent but super-spiritual, and correspondingly, on the law of analogy, in the first race of the fourth round. In each of the subsequent races and sub-races, he grows more and more into an encased and incarnate being, but still preponderatingly ethereal. He is sexless, and like the animal and vegetable, he develops monstrous bodies correspondential with his coarser surroundings. 2. Round. He, man, is still gigantic and ethereal, but growing firmer and more condensed in body, a more physical man, yet still less intelligent than spiritual. 1. For mind is a slower and more difficult evolution than is the physical frame. 3. Round. He has now a perfectly concrete or compacted body, at first the form of a giant ape, and now more intelligent, or rather cunning, than spiritual. 4. On the downward arc he has now reached a point where his primordial spirituality is eclipsed and overshadowed by nascent mentality. 2. In the last half of the third round, his gigantic stature decreases, his body improves in texture, and he becomes a more rational being, though still more an ape than a deva. All this is almost exactly repeated in the third root race of the fourth round. 4. Round. Intellect has an enormous development in this round. the hitherto dumb races acquire our present human speech on this globe, on which, from the fourth race, language is perfected and knowledge increases. At this halfway point of the fourth round, as of the fourth root or Atlantean race, humanity passes the axial point of the minor Manvantara cycle, the world teeming with the results of intellectual activity and spiritual decrease. This is from the authentic letter. What follows are the later remarks and additional explanations traced by the same hand in the form of footnotes. 1. The original letter contained general teaching, a bird's eye view, and particularized nothing. To speak of physical man, while limiting the statement to the early rounds, would be drifting back to the miraculous and instantaneous coats of skin. The first nature, the first body, the first mind, on the first plane of perception, on the first globe in the first round, is what was meant. For karma and evolution have centered in our nature such strange extremes from different natures, marvelously mixed. Footnote: the natures of the 7 hierarchies or classes of Pitras and Diane Kohans, which compose our nature and bodies, are here meant. 2. Restore. He has now reached the point, by analogy, and as the third root race in the fourth round, where his, the angel's, man's, primordial spirituality is eclipsed and overshadowed by nascent human mentality, and you have the true version on your thumbnail. These are the words of the teacher, text, words and sentences in brackets and explanatory footnotes. It stands to reason that there must be an enormous difference in the such terms as objectivity and subjectivity, materiality and spirituality, when the same terms are applied to different planes of being and perception. All this must be taken in its relative sense, and therefore there is little to be wondered at if, left to his own speculations, an author, however eager to learn, yet quite inexperienced in these abstruse teachings, has fallen into an error. Neither was the difference between the rounds and the races sufficiently defined in the letters received, nor was there anything of the kind required before, as the ordinary Eastern disciple would have found out the difference in a moment. Moreover, to quote from a letter of the Master's, the teachings were imparted under protest. They were, so to say, smuggled goods, and when I remained face to face with only one correspondent, the other, Mr. Blank, had so far tossed all the cards into confusion that little remained to be said without trespassing upon law. Theosophists, whom it may concern, will understand what is meant. The outcome of all of this is that nothing has ever been said in the letters to warrant the assurance that the occult doctrine has ever taught, or any adept believed in, the preposterous modern theory of the descent of man from a common ancestor with the ape, an anthropoid of the actual animal kind, unless metaphorically. To this day the world is more full of ape-like men than the woods are of men-like apes. The ape is sacred in India because its origin is well known to the initiates, though concealed under a thick veil of allegory. Hanuman is the son of Pavana, Vayu, the god of the wind, by Anjana, a monster called Kasati, though his genealogy varies. The reader who bears this in mind will find in Book 2, Pasim, the whole explanation of this ingenious allegory. The men of the third race, who separated, were gods by their spirituality and purity, though senseless, and as yet destitute of mind as men. These men of the third race, the ancestors of the Atlanteans, who were just such ape-like, intellectually senseless giants, as were those beings who, during the third round, represented humanity. Morally irresponsible, it was these third-race men who, through promiscuous connection with animal species lower than themselves, created that missing link which become, ages later, in the tertiary period only, the remote ancestor of the real ape as we now find it in the pithecoid family. So what you're telling me is that the Atlanteans were actually Marines, willing to stick their dick in anything, including animals. Okay. Footnote for family. And if this is found clashing with that other statement which shows that the animal later than man, then the reader is asked to bear in mind that the placental mammal is only meant. In those days, there were animals of which zoology does not even dream in our own, and the modes of reproduction were not identical with the notions which modern physiology has upon the subject. It is not altogether convenient to touch upon questions in public, but there is no contradiction or impossibility in this whatever. Thus, the earlier teachings, however unsatisfactory, vague, and fragmentary, did not teach the evolution of man from the ape, nor does the author of Esoteric Buddhism assert it anywhere in his work in so many words. But, owing to his inclination towards modern science, he uses language which might perhaps justify such an inference. The man who preceded the fourth, the Atlantean race, however much he may have looked physically like a gigantic ape, the counterfeit of man who hath not the life of a man, was still a thinking and already a speaking man. The Lemuro Atlantean was a highly civilized race, and if one accepts tradition, which is better history than the speculative fiction which now passes under that name, he was higher than we are with all of our sciences and the degraded civilization of the day. At any rate, the Lemuro Atlantean of the closing third race was so. And now we may return to the stanzas. And that is going to bring us to the end of the intermissions. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. I am here to try to bring a little bit of clarification to things that might be a little bit cloudy, and sometimes to speculate, and most times to point out where speculation is occurring and not being clearly defined. Anything that was said here can be true, but I do not hold it to be truth. Many of the things that were stated in his I directly disagree with for reasons that I have explained as we went through, so I don't really have to add to this now. So, if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was said, anything that I said here. Leave it in the comments below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that I am doing, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit Steak. Peace.